We live in a society where many practices and dynamics have been normalized without people stopping to question them. One of the most concerning phenomena is the objectification of certain groups, especially in the realm of sexuality, and how this is promoted and exploited by industries that profit from dehumanization. The problem begins with the idea of fetishism and morbid curiosity, which are often seen as a natural part of human desire. However, when someone develops a fetish for a specific group of people, such as transgender women, for example, what is actually happening is fetishization. That is, the person is not interested in the individual as a whole, but in a specific trait that makes them different or exotic. This dehumanizes the desired person, reducing them to an object of consumption. In many cases, the person being desired internalizes this role, accepting it as their only form of social or economic validation. At its core, this creates a vicious cycle. The entertainment and pornography industries reinforce these fetishes by creating content that turns these people into mere objects of pleasure. In turn, this shapes the audience's desires, causing more people to develop these same impulses. Those who are part of the fetishized group, often with limited economic or social options, are forced to adapt to this demand, further reinforcing the perception that their only value lies in satisfying the morbid curiosity of others. Another troubling phenomenon is elitism within certain sexual practices. Some individuals who engage in transgressive, violent, or extreme dynamics feel superior to those who seek more traditional and deep relationships. They believe they are more evolved, or have reached a level of sophistication that others do not understand. However, many of these practices originate in unresolved traumas and the repetition of abuse patterns. It is no coincidence that many people who seek mistreatment in relationships have experienced similar situations in the past. The most concerning aspect is that an industry sells this self-destruction as freedom. Objects are manufactured and marketed to recreate abusive situations. These fetishes are advertised as something liberating, and people are persuaded that all of this is simply a game. However, upon closer inspection, what is really happening is the exploitation of traumas and the psychological manipulation of those who believe they are acting out of free will. This is worsened by the culture of instant gratification, where fleeting and superficial relationships are seen as more attractive than those based on love and commitment. In many spaces, the idea of a stable and deep relationship is ridiculed as boring or outdated. The reality is that building a real connection with someone requires more effort, patience, and maturity than simply seeking momentary pleasure. But the industry has no interest in promoting healthy relationships because emotionally stable people are not compulsive consumers. Many groups have adopted these ideas without questioning them. Within certain LGBTQ communities, for example, subcultures exist that revolve solely around entertainment, fun, and commitment-free pleasure. This not only limits members' ability to build authentic relationships, but also reinforces the idea that a person's identity must be tied to consuming certain products, events, or lifestyles. In these environments, any attempt to seek something deeper is seen as a deviation from the norm. The biggest issue is that, due to the normalization of these dynamics, many people do not see the need to seek psychological help. They believe that what they are experiencing is natural because everyone around them does the same. However, when they finally enter therapy, they begin to realize that they deserve much more than being mere objects of desire. They start questioning what they previously accepted as normal and, in many cases, feel regret for having participated in dynamics that dehumanize them. They also discover that the actions of their previous friends and circles, which once seemed harmless, now appear toxic or even pathological. The path to healing is not easy because it requires unlearning many things that society has imposed as normal. But true freedom does not lie in blindly following what an industry dictates. It lies in being able to choose with awareness and autonomy. It is necessary to stop viewing life through the lens of immediate pleasure and start building relationships based on respect, authenticity, and mutual growth. Complete people do not need to be fetishes. They do not need to be objects of consumption. They do not need to fit into a culture that profits from their confusion and emotional emptiness. True independence lies in recognizing one's own worth and breaking free from the bubble of normalization that prevents seeing other ways of living, loving, and relating. This awakening process and breaking away from the normalization of objectification is neither immediate nor easy. Many people, upon realizing how they have been manipulated by the entertainment industry and the culture of instant gratification, go through an existential crisis. Suddenly, what once seemed pleasurable reveals itself as empty, and dynamics previously accepted as games or freedom begin to be seen as symptoms of a deeper problem. Once a person becomes aware of this, they face a dilemma. Stay within the system or leave it. This is where social pressure plays a crucial role. Often, those who start questioning these patterns are seen as moralistic, narrow-minded, or outdated. This happens because the culture of unlimited pleasure does not tolerate introspection or criticism. For the system to continue functioning, everyone must believe that the only option is the one they have been given. However, more and more people are waking up to this reality. As they seek therapy or simply begin reflecting on their lives, they realize that relationships based on authenticity and respect offer much more than the fleeting interactions dictated by the industry. They discover that real love is not based on external validation or being desired by others, but on a genuine connection that goes beyond the physical. Here, another problem arises: the fear of loneliness. Many people cling to these circles because they fear that, if they leave behind the culture of entertainment and fetishization, they will be left without a community. And this concern is not unfounded. In many cases, leaving these environments means breaking friendships, changing lifestyles, and even facing a period of isolation. But what most discover after this process is that temporary loneliness is a small price to pay for emotional freedom and personal dignity. The underlying issue is that society has convinced many people that their worth depends on what they can offer others. They have been told that if they are not attractive, desirable, or interesting within a consumer culture, then they are worth nothing. But this is a lie designed to keep them trapped in a cycle of emotional and economic dependence. Leaving this system involves rebuilding oneself from scratch. It means learning to value oneself for who they are, not for what they can offer to someone else. It means surrounding oneself with people who see beyond immediate pleasure and value authentic relationships. It means understanding that real love is neither fleeting nor superficial, but is built with effort, patience, and commitment. The key is to question. Question why certain behaviors are promoted as normal. Question why some people take pride in participating in dynamics that, deep down, degrade them. Question who benefits from certain groups living trapped in a culture of meaningless pleasure. True evolution does not lie in exploring the most extreme, but in building something solid and lasting. True freedom does not lie in following the norms imposed by an industry, but in having the courage to step outside them. And true happiness does not lie in being desired by many, but in being loved and respected by those who truly matter. In a world where everything has turned into entertainment, the greatest rebellion is choosing authenticity. Multiple industries have actively contributed to the normalization of pathological behaviors, disguising them as freedom, modernity, and personal exploration. These industries have not only profited economically from the objectification and degradation of human relationships, but have also shaped collective perception so that people accept these dynamics without questioning them. From entertainment to fashion, including pornography, social media, and pop psychology, each has played a key role in spreading these ideas. Movies, TV series, music, and advertising have been fundamental tools in normalizing superficial relationships, body objectification, and the glorification of limitless hedonism. Movies and TV series have promoted the idea that romantic love is obsolete or that healthy relationships are boring. Instead, they sell stories where drama, toxicity, and instability are synonymous with passion and authenticity. Commercial music, especially in certain genres, has reduced human desire to immediate satisfaction, promoting lyrics that reinforce the consumption of bodies rather than the construction of real bonds. Advertising sells desire as a commodity, making people believe that their value depends on their attractiveness rather than their values, intellect, or ability to create deep relationships. Pornography has not only distorted the perception of sexuality but has actively contributed to the fetishization and objectification of different groups, such as trans women, racialized women, and people with non-normative bodies. The industry has turned entire identities into consumption categories, teaching consumers that these people exist only for their pleasure. Additionally, it has promoted unequal power dynamics, normalizing violence, humiliation, and degradation as part of desire. Many people consume this material without realizing how it affects their perception of relationships and human dignity. Social networks have exacerbated the obsession with image, external validation, and superficiality in relationships. Platforms like Instagram and TikTok have reinforced the idea that physical attractiveness is a person's main value, making many obsessed with their appearance and others' approval. Dating apps like Tinder and Grindr have transformed human interactions into a fast consumption game, where people are discarded with a single swipe if they do not meet superficial standards. Constant exposure to these environments has caused many to lose the ability to develop real connections, as their brains have been conditioned to seek the next validation rather than deepen an existing relationship. The fashion and aesthetics industries have reinforced the idea that people only have value if they meet certain beauty standards. The message being sold is that a person only deserves love and attention if they are attractive according to prevailing trends. Plastic surgery and aesthetic procedures have ceased to be a personal choice and have become an imposed necessity, especially in communities where image is fundamental for social acceptance. Instead of teaching people to find value in who they are, these industries bombard them with messages that make them feel insufficient so they continue consuming. Instead of offering tools for true introspection and personal growth, the self-help industry has created simplistic and misleading messages that reinforce the idea that all decisions are valid as long as they provide momentary pleasure. Phrases like, "do what makes you happy," have been popularized without delving into what true long-term happiness means. Therapy has become a consumer product, where some therapists reinforce the idea that any desire is legitimate and must be satisfied, rather than questioning whether that desire stems from trauma or imposed social programming. The false idea has been promoted that any behavior is valid as long as it is consensual, ignoring that consent does not always mean real freedom, especially when people have been conditioned to accept degrading relationships as normal. All these industries have contributed to the creation of a society where deep and authentic relationships are increasingly difficult to build because instant gratification has replaced commitment and patience. Many people live in a constant identity crisis because they have been taught to see themselves through the eyes of others instead of developing an internal sense of self-esteem and worth. Love has been replaced by transaction, connection by consumption, and respect by superficial validation. The only way to break free from these dynamics is to actively question them and choose a different path. Stop consuming content that reinforces objectification and external validation. If something tells us we are not enough without buying, changing, or displaying ourselves in a certain way, it is likely a form of manipulation. Seek therapy with a critical perspective. Not all therapy is the same. It is important to find professionals who help discover who we really are, rather than just justify imposed desires. Surround yourself with people who value real relationships. Leaving circles where consumption and superficiality are the norm can be difficult, but it is necessary for personal growth. Accept that the path of authenticity may be lonely at first. Many people who start questioning these dynamics go through a period of isolation, but this is part of the process of finding a true identity. Relearn what love and dignity mean. Love is not consumption, and being loved is not the same as being desired. The industries that have normalized objectification, superficial consumption, and the degradation of human relationships thrive because people continue believing that there is no alternative. But there is another way. Building a sense of identity and value based on self-respect and authentic relationships. Leaving this system is not easy. It requires unlearning many things that have been ingrained since childhood. It means facing a society that glorifies the ephemeral and ridicules depth. But the reward is unmatched. A life where identity does not depend on external validation, where relationships are genuine, and where love is based on respect and real connection, not on objectification or consumption. In a world that has taught us to sell ourselves for validation, the greatest revolution is to stop being a product and start being a whole person. The cost of waking up. Breaking free from a system that thrives on objectification and superficial consumption is not just a personal challenge. It is a social and psychological battle. When people begin to question these dynamics, they often experience a deep sense of loss. They realize that much of what they believed was fulfilling was actually empty. They may lose friendships, social circles, or even a sense of identity tied to external validation. This awakening often brings discomfort. Many who leave behind the culture of fetishization, instant gratification, and transactional relationships feel like they are walking into an emotional void. The space left by superficiality is not immediately filled with deep connections and self-worth. It requires rebuilding. This transition can be painful, but it is a necessary step toward personal liberation. One of the greatest obstacles to escaping these toxic cycles is the backlash from the very culture that promotes them. Those who question the normalization of objectification and exploitation are often labeled as repressed, judgmental, or naive. This happens because the industries that profit from objectification need collective participation to survive. The moment people start stepping away, they threaten the system. The more individuals prioritize authenticity and real connection over consumption, the less power these industries have. This is why criticism of casual, consumption-driven relationships is often met with hostility. The culture of limitless pleasure and self-indulgence cannot tolerate introspection. It depends on keeping people too distracted and entertained to question whether they are actually happy. One of the hardest aspects of stepping away from the normalization of objectification is redefining personal worth. When people have been conditioned to measure their value based on how desirable they are, how much attention they receive, or how well they fit within an industry's expectations, it can be difficult to find meaning outside of that framework. True self-worth cannot be based on desirability, consumption, or external approval. It must come from an internal sense of identity, something independent of market trends, beauty standards, and social validation. This requires developing a sense of intrinsic value, learning to appreciate oneself beyond external metrics of desirability, creating meaningful relationships, surrounding oneself with people who value authenticity, respect, and emotional depth, shifting from consumption to creation. Instead of defining identity through what is consumed, products, entertainment, social approval, defining it through what is built, whether it is knowledge, personal growth, or meaningful bonds. Despite the challenges of leaving behind objectifying and consumption-driven dynamics, the reward is profound freedom. This freedom is not the illusion of doing whatever one wants that industries sell. It is the freedom to live without being controlled by imposed desires, external validation, or manufactured insecurities. People who step away from these patterns discover that they no longer feel compelled to fit into unrealistic beauty or desirability standards. They build relationships that are not based on mutual use, but on genuine connection. They develop a sense of self that is not dependent on industry-driven narratives of worth. They no longer need to seek constant validation to feel valuable. This shift is not just personal. It is a radical act of defiance against industries that profit from insecurity and objectification. Although personal liberation is crucial, real change also requires collective awareness. As more people begin to question and reject these dynamics, industries lose their influence. A culture that values depth, authenticity, and real human connection is a culture that is much harder to manipulate. To contribute to this shift, people must refuse to participate in industries that thrive on objectification. This means being critical of the media, entertainment, and social platforms that reduce people to objects of consumption. Promote and support real, healthy connections. Encourage relationships based on respect, emotional depth, and mutual growth rather than fleeting attraction. Educate others about the dangers of these industries. Many people participate in these dynamics unconsciously. Awareness is the first step to change. Redefine success and self-worth. Move away from cultural narratives that equate value with desirability, consumption, or superficial validation. Leaving behind a culture of instant gratification and external validation is not easy. It often means choosing discomfort, uncertainty, and even temporary loneliness over the false comfort of fitting into an industry-designed mold. However, the alternative is worse. A life spent chasing an illusion of happiness that never lasts. A life dictated by industries that do not care about individual well-being but about keeping people consuming, insecure, and dependent. The greatest rebellion is not to follow the latest trend, to fit into the most accepted subculture, or to seek the most attention. The greatest rebellion is to choose authenticity in a world that constantly demands conformity. A person who truly values themselves does not need to be consumed, objectified, or validated by industries designed to exploit insecurities. A whole person is not a product. A whole person is free. Leaving behind the system of objectification, instant gratification, and external validation requires a conscious effort. It is not enough to reject toxic dynamics. One must also actively build an alternative way of living. This process involves several key steps. For years, often since childhood, many have been conditioned to believe that their worth is tied to their desirability, status, or ability to conform to industry-driven ideals. This programming is reinforced through media, social networks, advertising, and even peer influence. To break free, one must consciously unlearn these beliefs. Question where desires come from. Many people believe their preferences are personal when, in reality, they have been shaped by exposure to certain images, narratives, and trends. Recognize emotional triggers. The industries that promote superficial relationships and self-objectification thrive on fear, insecurity, and comparison. Identifying how these emotions are used to manipulate behavior is the first step to resisting them. Detox from manipulative content. Reducing exposure to media that reinforces objectification, superficiality, and instant gratification allows the brain to recalibrate its perception of self-worth. When people step away from the validation-driven system, they often feel a void. This is because they have spent so much time defining themselves by how others see them rather than by their own values and aspirations. To build a strong, authentic identity, focus on what you create, not what you consume. Instead of measuring worth by external validation, develop skills, knowledge, and meaningful contributions. Discover intrinsic values. What do you truly care about? What kind of relationships, work, and personal growth bring genuine fulfillment? Reject labels imposed by industries. Many subcultures and social movements are co-opted by corporations that turn them into products. True identity is not something that can be bought or marketed. One of the biggest shifts people must make is relearning how to form genuine relationships. In a culture of instant gratification, many have lost the ability to build deep, meaningful connections. Move beyond the transactional mindset. Modern relationships, both romantic and platonic, are often built on what one can gain from the other, rather than mutual growth and respect. Prioritize quality over quantity. In a world obsessed with followers, matches, and likes, real relationships require fewer people but deeper bonds. Learn emotional intelligence and communication. Many people struggle with true intimacy because they have been conditioned to seek validation rather than vulnerability. Real love, friendship, and connection are built through time, trust, and shared experiences, not through appearance, status, or superficial attraction. Even after stepping away, the system constantly tries to pull people back in. The pressure to conform, consume, and seek validation is relentless. To maintain independence, avoid environments that reinforce toxic patterns. Certain social circles, industries, and platforms exist solely to keep people trapped in cycles of comparison and insecurity. Recognize manipulation tactics. Every industry that profits from insecurity uses psychological tactics to make people feel inadequate unless they conform. Create a personal philosophy. Instead of following trends, define what truly matters in relationships, work, and self-worth. True freedom is not just rejecting harmful influences, it is actively choosing a different path. The biggest challenge of choosing authenticity over objectification and superficiality is accepting that it is a lonely and difficult road. Mainstream culture will push back. The industries that thrive on objectification need participation to survive. Those who reject it will often be mocked, dismissed, or labeled as outdated or extreme. Friendships and relationships may change. When someone stops playing by the rules of external validation, those who still depend on that system may distance themselves. There will be moments of doubt, because the world constantly reinforces the idea that external validation equals happiness. Questioning that belief can feel isolating. But choosing this path means choosing real freedom, the kind that is not controlled by industries, trends, or the fear of being left out. Those who break free from these cycles and actively build an authentic life discover something extraordinary. They are no longer controlled by what others think, expect, or demand from them. They do not need to chase attention or approval. Their self-worth is independent of social validation. They experience relationships based on real connection. Without the pressures of superficial attraction and performance, relationships become deeper and more meaningful. They make decisions based on values, not trends. Their actions align with who they truly are, not with what industries tell them they should be. This is true autonomy, not the fake freedom that consumer culture sells, but the ability to define life on one's own terms. In a world designed to keep people chasing validation, choosing self-respect, authenticity, and real connection is an act of rebellion. The industries that profit from insecurity want people to doubt their worth. A person who truly values themselves does not need to buy, change, or conform to prove they matter. The culture of instant gratification wants people to stay distracted. A person who seeks depth, meaning, and real human connection cannot be manipulated as easily. The system wants people to remain dependent. A person who builds their identity on something real, rather than external approval, is truly free. The most dangerous person in a world of consumer-driven identity is the one who does not need the system at all. The greatest rebellion is to refuse to be a product. To stop seeking validation from industries that profit from insecurity. To reject the idea that worth is defined by desirability, social approval, or status. To be whole is to be untouchable. For decades, the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, have been championed in institutions across the United States.